What is happening out there, Roto Scouts basketball fans? How you guys doing? Happy Thursday, getting through the week. Most of the way to the weekend. Solid little 3-game NBA slate to talk about today. You got some Thursday night football lined up with hopefully a good football game. I know we got a little bit of a more limited version of the Bengals, but hopefully they can hang for at least first half into the third quarter and beyond. We'll talk about that one, I think, a little bit later on. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to land a show, given the start time of this slate, given the start time of that football game. I think we'll be okay to do a football show. Probably like 6:30, somewhere around there. Just pay attention to when things go live. Watch the Twitter handle. We're here to talk about a little 3-game NBA slate. Nothing crazy. Some definite values on the board. Hopefully people had good nights last night. Felt like we were on top of a lot of different things and then just kind of got let down by value. Basically, every value guy just kind of clunky at best. And then for me, the guy who burnt me the most out of the top players was Jalen Brunson. Just an ugly, ugly game by Brunson. Continuing to not be quite as good as he's been in years past. But I think we'll take that leap back as things calm down a little bit and the season gets into full gear. So I'm not worried about Brunson, but definitely a letdown in my lineups. But hopefully you guys did well out there. Got some interesting looking plays on the board for today. Obviously, with a 3-game slate, we've got a lot of very, very tight ownership up at the top. A lot of key pieces. Nice to see Giannis getting massive ownership on both sides in our top 150. Andre Jackson is a really interesting piece on this one. Stepping into the starting lineup, Gary Trent moving to the bench. I gave him 26. I think that's realistic. He's just been a .77 per minute player this year, .65 last year. Not a high usage guy. Wouldn't imagine that he's going to step into monster usage just because he's joining the starting rotation. You're just buying super cheap minutes. So he's an explosive piece on the DraftKings slate. Less so on FanDuel for 39, though. But just some really interesting big ownership pieces up at the top there. And then a lot of guys in through the 50s as far as exposure in our top 150. So we're getting to some very, very key specific pieces and then building blocks around them. But as mentioned, just a 3-gamer. We've got a couple ins and outs. Not that much that we're worried about, but a couple things to watch. But as far as the Vegas totals go, got the Jazz at the Bucks. 8.5 point game there. Not exactly an ideal point spread, but not running away into double digits just yet. 230.5, definitely appealing there. Bucks at 119.5, the highest implied total on the board. Some expectations of scoring on both sides, though. You can see the 111 for the Jazz is outpacing 3 of the other teams on the slate. Blazers and the Spurs, 217.5 total. Lowest end game of the day. Definitely on both sides, there are a few good players to choose from. You've got a crunch in San Antonio with some pieces out. We saw that not exactly work out yesterday around Stephon Castle. I'm sure we'll have some Wemby. I'm sure we'll have some Chris Paul as we go through. We'll find out what comes up from Portland as we look. Minnesota and Chicago is an interesting one. Zach LaVine is doubtful. I had him in to start the day, and then he got downgraded. I didn't downgrade him, but the team downgraded him, so I ended up taking him out. Usually if a guy's questionable, I'll have him in. If a guy's doubtful, I'll take him out unless there's misleading reporting going on via the injury report. I'm going to try and hew as much to reality as we possibly can with the projections. So the same situation basically for Chicago. I think we can look at that one again. And then Minnesota just at the top end like Ant. Pretty solid. 226.5 point total there. Minnesota favored by 9.5 on the road. Obviously, Minnesota is a grindy defensive team, so it's going to be difficult for Chicago to even reach some projected totals, but a few of these guys are going to be pretty interesting. As far as the ins and the outs go, all the ins and the outs, by the way, the questionables, the full injury, not the full injury report, but the relevant stuff. If you haven't used the projections before, I list all that on the projections page, so that's where I'm just reading it off of. So, as mentioned, Andre Jackson Jr. stepping in to the starting rotation for Gary Trent. And then probables, Jalen Smith, Jordan Clarkson, Isaiah Collier, Lauri Markkanen, and Colin Sexton, who is available. Questionables, Shaedon Sharpe, Giannis. If Giannis doesn't go, obviously that's a massive piece coming off the top of the slate. He is by several points the highest projected player, and you can see how much of him we're getting in these sims. So if he doesn't go, and I'm fairly confident he's going to play, it's a direct line to Bobby Portis for one thing, most of the time. He becomes an immediate and important value. And then it just creates a gaping hole for fantasy point scoring at the top of the board. And then Zach LaVine, doubtful. I've got him in the out column. That's usually where I put the doubtfuls. Matty Thybulle's out. Taylor Hendricks out. Chris Middleton continues to be out. That's it. Quiet in the chat so far. 16 people hanging out. I'm sure some more people will trickle in. You usually pick up viewers during the show as we go. So hopefully everybody's out there doing well. Hit the like button as we start out. Subscribe. Hit the little bell down there. Like I've been saying, we're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. We need like another 200 or whatever by the new year. I think that's still reasonable. It's only November 7th, but we need to get in gear a little bit. So, tell your friends. Tell your mom. Just pull up the show, Mom. Just click that little YouTube button, the little subscribe bell there, and then mute the notifications so she never gets them, never has to worry about it. In fact, don't even tell her. Just when you're home using their computer, just do it. Follow the show and then mute it. Nobody knows. Nobody cares. And we pick up subscribers. Just trying to get to 1,000. Check out RotoScouts, rotoscouts.com. Access to NBA, NFL, and NHL, all three sports, all in under $1 a day. Monthly, weekly, and quarterly plans are available. Jump on there. We're not trying to break anybody's bankroll in half. Want to keep you guys invested in the right place, spending your money wisely. I was waiting for somebody to chime in. I was just going to keep plugging until somebody chimed in, and finally somebody said something. Power's here. What's up, Power? But yeah, check out RotoScouts. Also check out our guys over at acemind.io. That's where we run the Sims. Use promo code RotoScouts, all in caps over there, 20% off your first month. Power says the slate is uglier than all I can say is got real drunk one night and the rest is history. Sounds like a fun story. You'll have to share that sometime, Power. If I put you on the show, would you share it with us? Is it that kind of a good story? Get a bunch of those from over the years. It's been a while. Little while. Things have slowed down a little bit. For one thing, I'm just here on top of this shit every single freaking day, so it limits the amount of stuff you can go do. But I think that's common. Mid-40s now. A little bit slower. But a lot of fun, blurry, drunk nights that are historic like that. I get you. Anyway, nobody wants to hear me rambling. Yeah, it's a message you want. It's good, though. So, let's dive into this thing. We'll go with our usual position by position. We've got a nice clean board today for a change since all these games are on both sites. Might as well take advantage. Short board. Cutting down to the guards. So, again, Andre Jackson. It's just a value square. You're just buying really cheap minutes and a starter. It's not like he's particularly good or necessarily at all good. 9.7% usage last year. He put up 0.65 FanDuel points per minute. This year on 14.7%, playing mostly off the bench, or entirely off the bench. 0.77 per minute. I've got him in like that kind of territory again, under 20 points in 26 minutes as far as his projection goes. If you give him a little bit more than that, he would have ended up in 100% of DraftKings lineups. He's in 88% of them as it is in the top 150. That's above the field, but that 88% is not a straight upward line. Like, that's not represented like this, like our Lillard share above the field on FanDuel is. So the field's going to be there dramatically on that value play. 3,500 point guard and small forward eligibility. Nice, unique eligibility. Gets him access to all the different spots on the DraftKings board. So you can move him into literally, 5, 6 different spots. So really like the upside. Love the value square. But know that you are probably just buying like 20 DraftKings points. 25 at the outside edge of probability. I don't think you're getting much more than that. That's kind of what I'm getting at, Getty. Yeah, I mean, he's already low usage. So, like, that's why I'm saying you just got to kind of temper expectations about what he's actually going to go out there and go do. But all he does is just buy you that access to the Giannis's of the world, to the better players. So he's a building block and nothing more. He's not a true ceiling player. You can see his value even, right? With the low per minute and the low projection, typically we're looking for 5.5 as our, like, that's a good value guy on DraftKings. He just got there, even at that crazy low price. On FanDuel, we're usually looking for 5. He's under 5. We've got a couple guys, 5.11 for Chris Paul there is interesting. The 4.85 for Dame Lillard with plenty of salary to spend is why we're getting a ton of that. But basically everybody on FanDuel is below 5, and everybody below, other than him on DraftKings at the guard spot, is below 5.5. So it's just a real short slate on which he is presenting kind of a unique value prop as just a building block. But he's in no way a ceiling player. He's in no way a guy that you should expect more than, like you said, 15% usage. In his normal role, he gets 14.7. He's more likely to decline and go back toward like that 9.7 that he put up 0.65 per minute last year. So, yes, almost mandatory play in a lot of lineups under your 150. If you're building one lineup by hand, he should probably be in it. It's just a good chalk value building block. But know what you're getting there. But 88% of our top 150 is meaningful. The field, I think, in that ownership was in the 50s or 60s. I can tell you right now. I think I can tell you right now. Come on. Yeah, 50s. So, we are appreciably above the field. If you're not comfy with having that much of a very low per minute value guy, I get it. And pivoting out of it is somewhat viable. You're probably looking at your most accessible pivot point is Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who doesn't have a very different projection in fewer minutes projected, who is a similar, slightly better maybe, on almost the exact same kind of usage as far as his per minute numbers, and costs 400 more. You do get the shooting guard access there, but you've got the guard spot to work with either way. And he came up 14% of the time in our top 150. So we do have him, but it's not a comparable direct pivot point. And you can see how that value score works for him versus this one. So it's not great to try and avoid it. What I would say is if you want to undercut the 88 and bring it back a little bit toward the field, if you're building 150, you should be comfortable having 70, 75 though. 65, somewhere in that territory. There's not many good value replacements. So you're just going to naturally be building different constructions that don't quite reach the projection or ceiling peaks that people who do use it do. On FanDuel at 35%, level with the field, he's a very important value building block there. But shooting guard only, a little bit more restrictive as far as what he can provide you access to, given how that price bounces off the rest of the slate. So he's perfectly fine. He's important there, but I think it's easier to get away from Andre Jackson on the FanDuel slate. Moving on from him, Io came up level with the field at around 40% on FanDuel, level with the field at around, a little ahead of the field at around 54% on DraftKings. 5,500, 5,300 across sites, both guard spots on both sites. Definitely looks like a piece again. Same exact opportunity in which he went out there and played 24.9 and put up 16 fantasy points, though. He's a better player than that. 0.79 on average last year on 16.8% usage. This year, 0.82 on 16.6. Just a 46.1% true shooting so far, but a solid little assist rate at 22.4%, decent facilitator, and just picks up minutes in this situation. So you just gotta ride it and hope you don't get burnt again like you did last night. But there's a lot of upside in going to that Dosunmu play. I will say the nature of the Minnesota defense is not exactly a great matchup, but that game on a 3-game slate still has appeal, and he looks like a very strong piece on both sites from the mid-range. Conley at 47, we're getting a lot on FanDuel. We're getting a lot on DraftKings too, but not away from the field a lot. On FanDuel, it does look like we're getting a little ahead of the field there, which I'm fine with, honestly. If he's going to be owned in the, let's guesstimate that in the high 20s, low 30s probably, given the way it's coming up there. I don't mind it. He's at 0.92 per minute this year on 16.8. He was at 0.92 per minute last year on 15.7. He's an older, low-usage player. He's slower than he used to be. He's not shooting well this year. 24 minutes. He's only 47. It's more about this than it is about that, or any of what he's done in his past. It's just how what he's doing right now bounces off the position and that 4,700. Same thing on DK, 4,600 at the point guard spot. We got him 53% of the time. The field's right there. That's slightly ahead probably, given that that's, again, shaded. All three of these guys probably just a little slightly ahead. Chris Paul's in very much the same bucket as Conley, a more productive player in that bucket, 1.01 versus the 0.92 last year, 1.05 this year versus the 0.92. Chris Paul still got more to give. Came up 46% of the time, probably a little undercut to the field there on FanDuel, but an aggressive piece that the field is going to have a ton of, and I think we should too. And then on DraftKings, level with the field at 41, 1.10 per minute player on the DraftKings slate so far this season. Chris Paul is still pretty solid. On a slate like this, you have to remember, we're only dealing with 3 games. There's only so many ways to fill these positions, so that's not a bad piece. It's not even a bad price fit, really. I do kind of like the idea on FanDuel, and you can do it on DraftKings as well if you just wanted to make the decision to get a little bit below the field on the lower owned of the 2 veteran point guards. But on FanDuel, the idea of maybe taking a few additional, since we're coming up a little bit below the field, maybe taking this a few additional points downward toward like 40%, still having a ton, but taking it down, 35, 38, 40, somewhere in that territory, and feeding some of it directly to the Mike Conley ownership, and then in different kinds of lineup configurations, feeding some of it to the Lillard ownership, just because of how much separation, how these guys are looking like the 2 strongest options against the Fields ownership. So taking it away from the guy, even though we got a lot of him, where it's level / a little below the field, and giving it to the guys to buy more edge on a short slate on those guys, I think is an interesting approach to how that landed on our sim. DiVincenzo, a player that I really like. I get to him a fair amount of the time. 20.67% is level with the field-ish on FanDuel, and 36% is actually below the field on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I think that's one I would be maybe interested in at least exploring a few additional shares of, because he's a fairly high-ceiling player. When those threes are falling, he can shoot up the board for just raw, real-life scoring a little bit. And he's an okay, at least, facilitator, capable of running the offense if they need him to. There's a decent amount of upside in DiVincenzo, even in mid-range type minutes. Played 28-3 the other day, put up 32.5 fantasy points. On a 3-game slate, that could be impactful. Most of the time, his scoring is derived from hitting the 3. He was not earlier in the season when we looked. Still at just 33%, 6.9 a game. The attempts are down a little bit. He was taking 8+ last year, and obviously the makes at 33% are way down. He was a 40% shooter last year. Juan Soto reportedly has a meeting scheduled with a top suitor. They're treating this like The Bachelor. As I was sipping that coffee, I came up with a concept for a fantastic show that should be on like the MLB network or something, where you just do that, right? Just have it be The Bachelor and make all the GMs compete like on The Bachelor, like with stupid ass dates and competitions, and have the GMs like run a race and the last guy gets eliminated. The last man standing gets to offer a contract. Pretty sure they should do that. Not with Soto. Take a lower end free agent. Make it more interesting. Julian Champagnie, 5,000. Not bad. It's another one where anybody that comes up like this, right, where we got a little bit of edge on the field and they're low owned overall, right? Our 15% being a little above the field there means the field's 10-ish, 12-ish at best. So anybody that's low owned like that is another player I'd maybe be interested in sinking a few of these shares if I undercut that spot into. And then the same thing applies on DraftKings. Sorry to keep using FanDuel examples. They're all just kind of sitting right there. And Champagnie came up just level with the field on DraftKings, maybe a little above. But that's 25-ish% versus this one, the field might be notably low. He's 5,000 on the FanDuel slate. He's the same price with forward access on the DraftKings slate. So that's what's creating a little bit of additional appeal over there. That's what's creating driving in a little bit of additional ownership over there. But I think he's more interesting potentially right here, where the field's not necessarily going to be there as much. So that's an interesting little spot, another little spot to maybe pivot some shares into. Another, relatively low-end player, 0.76 per minute last year, 0.79 per minute this year, 14%, 15.7% usage. Played 28-1. What was that, last night? Put up 17-6. It's a very low return in a lot of cases. But he's cheap. Got him at 32 minutes. Could be 28 to 32, somewhere in that range. If we get 28 minutes, it's obviously going to be buying a little bit of a low. But he's cheap enough that even if you get 28, even if he's coasting through on a little bit better than the 0.79, mid 0.8s, and that's a difference of a bucket, he'll be all right. And there is a little bit of cheap upside there. Alexander Walker, again, another, I mentioned him just before when we were talking about A.J. Jackson, but Alexander Walker at 14.3, 14.4 as far as his usage the last 2 years, 0.73, 0.78 per minute on FanDuel, 0.81 on DraftKings. He is very cheap. He's a cheap filler piece that will rotate into most of these spots when you don't get Jackson. But he's not like a go-to alternative. He's not. It's just that he's low-owned. He's in his normal role. There's nothing noteworthy or exceptional about Alexander Walker today other than the fact that it's a short slate. He's cheap. It's a short slate, so he's coming up with shares. We did get him ahead of the field, 22% on FanDuel, behind the field at 14% on DraftKings for a little bit less in the just raw sense. He's got the forward access on FanDuel. He's got point guard, shooting guard on DraftKings. I'm fine being under the field there, but it is probably one, again, if you're looking to get away from this, he's first off the easiest access point as far as the 3,900. And you could claw your way back toward the field there without damaging yourself too much as long as you're differentiating in other ways. Kobe White just kind of landing with the field on FanDuel, way below the field on DraftKings. That's kind of interesting. He's another guy who just, he's getting his usual complement of minutes. He plays 33-2. I've got him at 34. But should just benefit from Zach LaVine being gone. Played 28-6 in the last game, put up 15.7 FanDuel points. He's a better player than that. He's unlikely to do that again. 0.90 last year per minute, 0.96 so far this year per minute on a little bit of increased usage. A lot of benefit in the short sample from playing multiple games with LaVine out. 1.02 per minute on DraftKings, but again, we really didn't get there. I feel like we're getting our IO cut, obviously. and it's kind of the same guy from the same team coming in at a same position in a much lower price. So I think Io's just boxing him out of a lot of those shares. But if you wanted to consider him a viable alternative to click into those spots, if you're hand building one or a couple, perfectly fine. The 1 in 5 is not bad over here and level with the field. This is where I do think the undercut is probably a little justified. 7,300. Just not a great price fit with everybody else at the guard spot today. Josh Giddey at 74 is almost exactly the same thing on that team. The third man in that guard mix as far as our concerns. Point guard only, 7,400. We got him 8% of the time, nearly 9%, but again, a hard undercut to where the field is. So, Io's the guy as far as DraftKings. He's also the one on FanDuel. But we got 30% level with the field on Giddey on FanDuel. We got 21% level with the field on Kobe White on FanDuel. On DraftKings, we are below the field on both those guys pretty significantly, and it is entirely about how that 73, how that 74 hits the position. Keontae George, another player, we got a little bit less than the field, 12%. Not bad, though, if he's going to be 15, 18% owned by the field, and you wanted to work your way back toward that territory with a cap of like maybe 20 against where he came up here. He's a 0.96 per minute player, 6,400. It's a little bit cheaper than obviously, the players we were just looking at from the Bulls. So getting to George with equivalent minutes at the position, he's a 0.88 per minute player this year on 25.6% usage in 7 games. Playing nearly 33 minutes a night. The other day he played 38.6 and put up a 51.7. So there is a little bit of inflation in his his per minute number right now from a small sample and from a big performance there. But he's a reasonably interesting piece on a short slate. And it's another one on FanDuel where, given the fact that we got basically what the field got, but that is in the single digits or maybe the low double digits, if you wanted to double that, take a 20-ish% position and gain some leverage against the field on a guy who is a reasonable option to succeed with true minutes, it's not a bad move to make. If you tweak this with in very minor ways, an extra minute here, take 1 minute away from one of those guys, he would have landed with more upside, and he would have landed in more shares against the field. So I think that's an interesting one. What are you guys talking about? Giddey can't stand playing Io, Giddey, White. Yeah. I get you. Yeah, I mean, I just highlighted the disappointing games that they just had in this exact situation. And today they're playing Minnesota. So, yeah, I get you. It's just, for one, short slate. And, for two, we can't really ride on past performance in, one specific game. If you played a full season of, getting those returns, obviously, right? But we can't point to one game as like the came up red 3 times in a row on the roulette wheel. Definitely going to be black this time. Doesn't work that way. We got to look at the big sample. We got to look at the true numbers. So I get you. In an anecdotal sense, each of those guys has burnt me multiple times. Each of those guys has burnt me this season. So totally with you. But you got to go there. One lineup you could get away probably with dancing around all 3 of them, given how they hit. If you're building more than one, you got to have at least a couple shares of at least a couple of those guys. And Io, again, is looking like the best one. What's up, Aloysius? What's going on? Sleep your mind. Who is my most favorite tonight? Assuming he plays, Giannis was looking pretty stellar at the top of the board. Is that too easy of an answer? I know it's kind of like the duh answer of the slate. But when I run a sim and Giannis comes up nearly 80% on that site and 88% on this site, it's kind of the go-to answer. Wemby on DraftKings looks quite good as well. On FanDuel, he's a little bit more expensive against the cap, and we still got him, but not nearly as much. He does have power forward over there, which makes him interesting. I will say on FanDuel, the Lillard ownership is very interesting at 61% and way ahead of the field on a player like that. I think that's something to definitely get interested in. The Ayton ownership that I'm just noticing now is, wow. Wasn't expecting that necessarily, but it's a shorthanded center slate on FanDuel, so I guess it does, eyeballing it, make some sense. Because you can get that and have Wemby, Giannis at the power forwards. Yeah. Interesting. And then DK-wise, there's the obvious chalk value guys that are very, very important. We got a massive chunk of Dalen Terry with like no minutes projected here. It's above the field, but not, again, a straight line above the straight line up. We'll talk about that in the forward spot in a minute, but that's yet another value square from the Bulls. Yeah, I mean, again, raw favorite. It's gotta be Giannis, but then those value guys, and then I'll throw the old points into the mix, just given the way that's sorted out. I don't know which of the. I guess I like Paul a little bit better on just the per minute upside that he provides. Also, just the playing with Wemby of it. Not that Conley doesn't have good teammates, but Paul's also drawing 8 more minutes in the projections. So it'd probably be like him. Giannis, Wemby as far as the stars go. The obvious guys right there as far as the values. If you just want, like, what are your top 5, 8 guys on the slate. Round out the guard position, just looking for some differentiated guys. We got just 6% of Lillard on the DraftKings slate because he's 95 at point guard only over there. Dame Lillard is an $8,800 FanDuel play today at point guard only. That's a spectacular price to find Dame Lillard on a 3-game slate. 117 per minute on 29.8% usage so far this year. 116 on 27.4% usage last year. Tells me with a couple extra shots, there's a couple extra points in there in the mix there. He should ride his way into the 1.2 plus territory if he continues to get that extra, 2 and change % usage. Gary Trent and his 14.8% usage swaps out with Jackson and his 14.7 off the bench, but 9.7 overall last year. So on the idea that Jackson might not be a direct pivot, maybe there's another 2-3 points of worth of shots there for some of the big players from Milwaukee to go take. I think Dame is standing tall on the FanDuel slate. 61% of them, and our biggest upside piece against the field. 4.85 on the value score. He's not a 5+. He's a good value at that 88, but it's still expensive. But I think he looks pretty solid. We got a bunch of Anthony Edwards on that FanDuel slate as well. 48% of him there. We got a hard undercut on Ant-Man on the DraftKings slate. That's another player where it's just an impactful price difference. 9,300 shooting guard only on DraftKings. He's got multi-position eligibility, and he's only 87 on FanDuel. 48% is level with the field. That's absolutely a player you can run off and grab a few additional shares of because he's got slate winning upside on any given slate. So far this season, the production's down a little bit. 106 per minute versus 121 on the FanDuel scale, 114 on DraftKings per minute so far this season. He's just a bad price fit here. But again, if you want to take that up to 10, 15%, whatever you're getting to, on a superstar like that, there's no real issue with taking a position. And as I've been putting it, you wander off down a different path than everybody, and you're building a little fort on a hill around Anthony Edwards, who is one of the best players on the slate. No problem with it. Getty's least favorite player on FanDuel today is Lillard. Based on? Did they confirm Giannis? Friday. Bronny James expected to make his G League debut on Saturday. I have not seen confirmation on Giannis' status. Getty. He's a spectacular play. Again, if he plays, he's absolutely fantastic. He's easily the highest raw projected player by, I think it's like 6-7 points. I got him right around 60, if memory serves. I don't need to rely on my feeble memory. I could just click it. Yeah, 61 DraftKings, 60 on FanDuel. The next highest projected guy is Wemby, I'm pretty sure. 54, 52. It's a massive gap as far as just your raw projection. But more importantly, based on where he's at, price-wise, position, based on where the public's at, we got monster shares and we got way above the field on him, and he's the true superstar of the slate. All he needs to do is play, but we don't actually have that yet. Doug Geely makes or Geely, I'm not sure which way to pronounce that, Doug, but appreciate the drop in there. It's not a bad point that they certainly don't need him to win this game. So Doug's thinking he sits. This is the key one to watch. Getty saying Bucks beat reporter already dropped the updated starting lineup. Yeah, Jackson, we've been talking about Jackson the whole show. Jackson I know about. I have not seen the confirmation on Trent. I suspect he's just putting him in, or on Giannis rather. I think he's just putting him in there because Giannis is a starter, but he's questionable. Right? Just like I've got Giannis projected despite being questionable. The assumption is Giannis plays and Giannis starts. Power demonstrating that he would be a better coach than Doc by saying, I think Giannis is out because they're being careful with him on back-to-backs. They don't need him against Utah, but will need him tomorrow against the Knicks. Yeah, plus, hey, look, if you're looking to deal him to the Knicks, that's a showcase game. Knicks got to find out who this kid is. I kid. Just because I'm really enjoying the fact that immediately after we acquired Karl Anthony Towns, everybody started talking about Giannis wanting to come, or not wanting to, but the Knicks being players for Giannis. It's like, all right, let's calm down. We got our guy. Let's work with what we've got. Not that I don't want Giannis. So, yeah, I mean, that is the key point to watch as far as status going into lock is what's going to happen with Giannis. Again, if he doesn't go, it's Bobby Portis all day, but that's a wildly different price proposition that's going to change the shape of everything as far as these exposures go. If there's no Giannis, Wemby explodes as far as exposure and would be extremely highly owned just by virtue of being, again, another jump up from everybody else as far as raw projection. He would become the go-to pay-up superstar of the slate. But what you would probably also see is a big bounce for the Dames, for the Anthony Edwardses of the world, and those upper mid-range or lower cost superstars and stars. You'd see a little bit of a pretty significant bounce for them if all this salary and all that positional commitment came out of the slate. So, critical to watch, obviously. Again, rounding out the guards. We'll get through this. So we talked about the Bulls. I'm just looking across sites. So 10, 12% of Alexander Walker, Kobe White, Keontae George on DraftKings. Anthony Simons we didn't really talk about. 0.90 so far this season, 0.95 on DraftKings. That's down, along with 2 points of usage going down. I don't think it continues to be that far down with the usage loss. He picks up points in a number of different ways, so I think there's enough upside at worst back to like 0.95 and make him a haircut better. 34 minutes in the game the other day, 32.2 FanDuel points. He's reasonable enough upside. It's just a little bit under the field on both sites. Harder undercut to the field at lower overall ownership on DraftKings. Stephon Castle, again, massive disappointment as a value play yesterday that we were all over from early in the day. Ended up starting like we were hoping for. Played just 25 minutes. Put up 16.4 FanDuel points. He's been a 0.70 per minute player so far this season. I've got him right back around that range. I gave him the 25 minutes exactly back. If he's playing well, I would imagine upside beyond that. I'm sure they want to see what they've got in their fourth overall pick. 4,400, both guard spots FanDuel. 44 shooting guard, small forward, DraftKings. Way more of them on FanDuel. Way less of them on DraftKings. Hard undercut to the field, 5% over there. 28% over here, and a little bit above the field. It's another guy. He falls right in line with the A.J. Jacksons of the world, the Noahs of the world. I don't think there's much more than that. So, like, yeah, it's similar enough ownership, really. I was going to say, if one of these guys was a little bit flatter against the field, like Champagne might be the closest comparison point there, actually, at 600 more FanDuel scale. And then on DraftKings, you're also 600 more. Are they both the same price on both sides? Interesting. If you wanted to pick up a few shares of Castle here against the field, say the field's at like 15 there, or you wanted to double this and take it up to 10, but stay below the field on it, I think you're all right. But I don't know that I'd draw it from like these value guys. I might just draw it from any Champagne that you're getting because you're still level and maybe ahead, and that still gives you a pickup of $600 to spend somewhere else. So that's a reasonable direct one-for-one change that you can make in a lineup. And it's similar on FanDuel for the same price difference. So that's a reasonable, same team, similar pricing, price pivot on a short slate. Nobody else down this way really that relevant. 8% of Tumani Kamara, who's fine. Give him 30.5 minutes today. Played 36.5 the other day. He's averaging right around the 30.5. Put up 34 FanDuel points. That's ahead of his usual pace. 0.80 per minute player on just 12.7% usage this year, 13.4% usage last year, 0.74 per minute. It's only moderate as a facilitator, not a good rebounder, 57.5% true shooting so far this year. He's just a guy who fits into a few lineups because most of these other guys are used up already in those other shares, and I asked to build so many lineups, but he doesn't look like a critical value. Playable, but not key. All these guys, low single-digit exposures to Sexton, Clarkson, Scoot, Shaden Sharp, who's questionable. Malachi Branham, who's 0.70 last year, but sees usage. 0.70 on 19.2% usage. Pretty weak. 0.90 so far this year on 23.6%. He gave them that on that, so they gave him more usage. He's returning a little bit more so far this year, but 62.9% true shooting so far. Sub 10% assist rate, rebounding rate. Just kind of an empty scorer. Not really hitting the board at all on FanDuel. 3,800, we got him 4% and below the field on DraftKings. The last, minorly relevant piece there. Jump to the forwards. Mamba hates the soft age of NBA injury management. I think the interesting one to watch is, as I keep going back to when we talk about that team, what the Dubs are doing this year. Trying to keep everybody in like that 30-ish minute territory on a lot of games. Rather than doing a lot of, and not that they don't sit players as well, but maybe if there's something to that as far as just, keeping the longevity within the season and keeping general team health a little bit, maybe we go to a league where basically everybody plays 30 minutes rather than 36 at the top end, unless they really got to chase it. I'm not sure. But, there's definitely better ways to do injury management than what we're getting right now out of the NBA. I'll say that. Where did I misclicked here? Hold on. I buried you guys by accident there. David saying the Bucks starting lineup's out. I haven't seen it yet, David, but when we get it, we'll talk about it. Fistula Poop is pointing out that the point spread says he plays. Sure. That's Vegas speculating. It's what everybody's doing until the team tells us whether or not he's playing. But yeah, I would say that that's probably accurate. Do I like Branham on DK? Not particularly. I think he's overperformed his talent a little bit with that uptick. But he is getting more usage, as I was just saying. And we only got him like 4% in that sim. That's below the field. He's cheap. He's in that same mix with like as a Noah alternative. We got a little bit more of Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Not that much. Alexander Walker this year is 0.78 and he was 0.73 last year. Very similar type output. The 0.90, again, I do think is a little bit of an aberration. But what's not is the fact that Malachi Branham does get more usage than Nickeil Alexander-Walker, just purely. 19.2 last year versus Alexander Walker's 14.3. 23.6 last year versus Alexander Walker, or this year versus Alexander Walker's 14.4. When Branham's out there, he'll be taking shots. It's just he's been making them. Making 50% of his 2.5 threes a game so far this season. I don't have his two-point per shooting, but 62.9% true shooting for him this season so far. It's going to come down. He's going to revert back to this kind of production, maybe a little bit higher if that uptick in usage continues in this role. But he's a low per minute guy. If we got him with more minutes, would he become more valuable if he shot into even like that 26-minute range? Absolutely. No worries, David. Yeah, it's been a topic of conversation, obviously. So we're keeping eyes out for it. 5:17. I don't think these games start till like 8 something. So probably would be a little bit early to have it. But as soon as we get any news, definitely would be interesting. Mom is saying if Giannis is out, wouldn't that make Portis a lock and Lopez a better play than Wemby? Giannis, the Portis part, yes. Lopez would definitely go up in value, and see where we got him. The reason I was saying Wemby is just because there's going to be a salary void and a production void. And I think the way that the slate is projected, even if Brolo gains ground projection-wise, which he absolutely would, to your point, he's right here. He would go into the 33, 34 point range FanDuel, similar DraftKings. Point behind that or so, and he would definitely gain ground against both in public ownership and in our top 150 exposure and in how that looks against the field. I would expect it would be into the maybe 40s and somewhat level with the field at 57, and maybe a little bit less than that on FanDuel with the one center. But the interesting impact there, if we're taking Giannis out again, is that 11.5 versus the 11.4 here. It's the 6-point projection gap there versus how much can be made up by combining multiple versions of $69, $68, $7,200 guys, so on and so forth across different positions. I don't know that it's going to be enough there, spreading that out, where you're going to have enough decent mid-board guys on a 3-gamer like this to make up that projection gap that would be created if you also took Wemby out of that equation. So that's why I was saying I think most of the Giannis would fill in just around Wemby. Not positive. I haven't simmed for that. You could easily, by the way, if you're using AceMind or honestly any other sim tools. AceMind.io, though, is my chosen one that I'm using. And if you went over there, it would just be a matter of making those projection adjustments. And you can, throughout the day, kind of run tools like that and just speculate. All right, I don't think Giannis is going to play. I'm going to take him out. I'm going to give Portis this. I'm going to give so-and-so and that. And you can see that version of tonight's contest. So it's worth doing a lot of the time. Let's get into the forward spots before we burn too much more time. You're going to remove a highly owned player from your player pool and log in a player that was, who would those two players be? So I don't typically remove anybody from my player pool. I just kind of let the math eliminate guys for me, I guess. I will say that it does look like Walker Kessler was eliminated from the player pool on FanDuel by the math. We got to none of him. Doesn't look like the field's there all that much, so I wouldn't call him a highly owned guy. The best guideline I could give you on that 8 game is probably follow where these hard undercuts are. And I'm not saying take any of those guys out. But the undercut, and again, this is all as things stand right now, right? I'm not saying take Brook Lopez, and that's one specific reason that I don't like taking guys out, is specifically with basketball. I don't want to have to remember one more thing to go, oh shit, I got to put Brook Lopez back into my player pool in the last 5 minutes before lock when I'm frantically trying to make changes because Giannis suddenly scratched. I just want him to be there, take his projection upgrade, and run with it and get into my lineups, right? So I don't like doing stuff like that. But the answer to your question is kind of just in the underlying results here as far as where those hard undercuts are. So the darkest red backgrounds with the direct down arrows and the direct dark red coloring are your hard undercuts. But like some of those guys, again, like I would not tell you to take Anthony Edwards out of your player pool. And especially, in the event that Giannis doesn't go, that big projection of his for that salary becomes massive on this slate. And he has major slate winning upside as the slate exists right now. So just because he's a hard undercut to where the field's at right now at 5.3% in our top 150 doesn't mean you want to go taking him out of your player pool. If anything, it means there's a little bit of room to claw your way back to the field on a superstar caliber player. It's just the way it mapped out. We're not getting there. All right, one last time. I'm going to try and sort this to forwards. Stop answering questions. Giannis is, again, the big palooka of the slate. Dalen Terry is the interesting one that pops onto this board because he came up 54.6% of the time on DraftKings at 3,200. 3,700 on FanDuel. I don't think we really need to worry about him nearly as much. He came up just 6% of the time. He's a fairly low-end player on fairly low-end usage. He's only projected for 20 minutes against a very good defensive team in kind of a bad situation on a team that has been underperforming when we rotate these guys in so far. In their last game, he played nearly 24 minutes. He put up nearly 20 FanDuel points. That's around the expectation here. This is only another price building block on DraftKings because he's only 3,200. But again, that comes in, we're looking for 5.5 in our value score. That comes in at 495. That is not a good raw form value score. It's a good 3-game slate, just building block. That's all he is. But we got a big share of them, nearly 55% and above the field. Field's, I would imagine, in the 30s. Let's see here. Actually, field's lower than that. I'm surprised it's not higher. They might have lowered this since I ran that sim. I think they did. I don't know why. They didn't take minutes away from him. This would come down probably. Actually, maybe not. Against lowered ownership, it might just get stronger. That's interesting. The ownership that I used cut that down probably by about half. I don't think he's a diminished value play. Keep an eye on the projection. If you see the projection go south a little bit. What do I have, man? 15.8 in 20 minutes is... might be a little aggressive on him, I guess. I've got him basically at the 0.79. But I mean, we're essentially, if I was to say, oh boy, I got to take him back down to the 0.73 that he's at this year, it would be a matter of essentially one and a half fantasy points. Would take him down into the 14s as far as that projection goes. And I would probably, if I adjust it, when I adjust it, kind of speculating toward the future, I would probably land more in the 0.75, kind of split the difference range, which puts him back at 15 plus. It's essentially no difference as far as that raw projection goes. I think he would still land in most of these lineups that he did. At 3,200, I think it's just a building block. But again, a low-end, low-usage player. Speaking of which, there's Jaden McDaniels. We got to him 50% of the time on FanDuel. More realistic as far as the minutes projection goes. That is a big chunk of Jaden McDaniels to have against the field on FanDuel, but he is looking like one of the more viable value pieces at both forward spots. 0.67 last year, 0.66 this year. Sees a little bit more usage than the Dalen Terrys of the world, but not that much. Sees similar to like Julian Champagnie, not that much more, and produces a little bit less. Only got him 34% of the time on DraftKings. It's essentially level with the field. He is, I'm sure some of that is getting chewed up, though, by this value play. If you alter that, take it off the board, or just undercut it, then I think that is directly where they would go. But, I mean, there's a visible price difference right there. I think Jackson just gets his either way. Champagne we talked about for the guard position. Nas is always interesting. 26 minutes the other day, which is what I've got him. I forgot I changed it to 25. I had him at 26 earlier in the day. 26 the other day. He plays 25-1 on average. Put up 43.8 FanDuel points in that time the other day. On average, he's a 1.10 player on 20% usage this year. The per minute is up a little bit on slightly less usage so far this year. The minutes are pretty rock solid. If anything, he trends upward rather than downward from the minutes. 24% of them on DraftKings and slightly below the field. 31% of them on FanDuel, slightly above the field. I'd rather be in the FanDuel position on a short slate on a player like Nas. Given that that's not a crazy hard undercut to the field, taking that back up to 30-ish% is probably fine. 5,600, it's not a backbreaking investment. And again, just reasonable trajectory toward upside scores most of the time for Nas. Grant, pretty far below the field on FanDuel, further on DraftKings, I would say. 18% of them still on DraftKings, so we got him a decent amount of the time. $6,700 power forward over there. He's a 0.98 per minute player, which is, for 67, feels like a little bit of a awkward price fit. And for 68, a couple spots further down, Bobby Portis at 105. Granted, it's a minutes difference. For 56, obviously, again, with a minutes difference, there's a 115 on Nas. For 79 with marketing, we're only getting 107 this year, but we got 117 last year. Grant's just okay. The 0.93 per minute last year on 25.5% usage. That's a lot of shots to only be putting up 0.93 per minute. 10.5% assist rate this year, 6% rebounding rate this year. Mediocre. Don't love the spot again in that game against San Antonio either. It's by far the lowest end game out of the three. And Portland is the lowest implied total out of the three. So taking a medium grade player at kind of a bad price for him from the worst team environment on the slate doesn't really have much appeal. But again, you do have him as a usable piece. He's playable. He's not ideal. Speaking of Harrison Barnes, holy hell, 49.3% Harrison Barnes today on FanDuel. Yikes. That's one I think I would maybe explore my options as far as maybe bringing this back down a little bit more toward the field. There's a ton of minutes available in San Antonio. In that situation, just the other day, though, played 18-3, 2.7 FanDuel points. So far on the season, 0.57 per minute on 12% usage. It's down a tenth of a point per minute from what he gave us last year, which was still not good, on 15.4% usage. On DraftKings, we got him a much more sane 13% of the time. That's a little below the field. Field probably hovering 15-20%, which is fine for a three-gamer. You can mix your way back up to that at 4,800. He does have eligibility at both forward spots. This 45 against the FanDuel cap is making him a relevant piece, much as I hate to say it. Telling you right now, if somebody burns me tonight, it's almost certainly going to be Harrison Barnes. Julius Randle. Got him, but fairly significant undercut to the field on the FanDuel slate. 30%, that's not nothing as far as the exposure goes. Randle's a good, not great player. It's not a bad price to find him at, though, 74. He was a 117 per minute player last year in his half season with the Knicks. 28.7% usage. He's seeing less usage in Minnesota. 1.08 per minute so far this year. What Randle does give you is a reasonably good rebounder, a reasonably good scorer, and an underrated facilitator as a big man. 24.1% assist rate. He does do a little bit of everything. but he's just okay. You can get here, but it looks like the field is going to be more aggressively there on the FanDuel slate, so I would maybe watch your step on FanDuel. On DraftKings, we didn't get him that much. 8.6% of the time for 8,200. That's a big price difference site to site. Does have center eligibility on DK, but it didn't really help him out. Just kind of a mix and match play at best over there. But if you took it up to 10, 15, he definitely comes with a ceiling, so that's not a completely terrible proposition. Patty Williams just looks like an average option. 7.3%, a little below the field for 48 on DraftKings. 18%, a little above the field for 46 on FanDuel. Makes sense. There's another sub 7 per minute so far this year, and not much better last year. 0.69 this year, 0.76 last year. Just mid-teens usage rate both years. Cody Williams has been awful so far. Did put up 26 in 29.9 in their last game, but overall 0.51 per minute is pretty atrocious. I think that's the lowest per minute mark among anybody with 20 minutes or more on this slate. 12.5% usage rate so far this season. We got him 7% on DraftKings. He's a $3,900 piece, but we've got a lot of those to work with. 39 and cheaper. So he just kind of falls by the wayside on a lack of production. So far has not looked good. Again, Portis gains major ground if Giannis doesn't go. Right now for 68, we got him 6% of the time on DraftKings at power forward center, a little bit below the field. You could take a little bit more upside than that with Bobby if you wanted to, just in a normal situation. He's a 1.05 per minute player. It's a 3-game slate. He's reliably going to go out there and play 25, 26 minutes. We didn't get him on FanDuel. I'm a little surprised by that, but that 79 is pretty high. That's a big price. So I get it. If this changes, though, that 79 is not going to look that bad. It might, I don't know that it would create like a runaway freight train of Bobby Portis shares as far as the public enthusiasm and you know, it being a critical go-to spot, though, at that price, even if he jumps into the 30s. As far as the minutes go, but you can see what he does in 38.9. He puts up 50 points pretty reliably. So especially, honestly, if the field doesn't quite get there, if that role change happens for Portis, which again, we're watching Giannis' status. Right now, he's not looking like a value. You can see that value score at 3.7. We're looking for 5. So not a good fit right now. But if that changes and the field doesn't rush to it, not saying you have to, you know, lock it in or take a gigantic share, but getting ahead of even, you know, lowish ownership on the field on Bobby Portis as like a pay up to be different option in that scenario would be kind of interesting. Not a bad player in that role to do it with. Castle, we talked about. John Collins, meh. 6,600, 9% DraftKings. Less than that and less than the field at 65 on DK. FanDuel was the first one. I said it the wrong way around. He has put up 1.43 per minute so far this season on 27.7% usage. Is that right? Okay. I want to make sure that was looking up the right one. I don't know. I'm not wild about the Collins play. I guess you could get a little bit more if you wanted to goose it into like the 15 range on FanDuel. 8, 10, somewhere around there on DK. Just doesn't look like a great fit. Again, just a lot of these guys, even on the short slate, get boxed out by some of these value squares in the construction of these lineups. Markkanen, a piece on FanDuel, currently questionable. Not a piece on DraftKings. 79 versus 76 is having a little bit of an impact there. 24% of them on the FanDuel slate. 12% of Denny. I don't think anybody wants to get excited about that. Just 0.67% and below the field on the DraftKings slate. Hard undercut on DK to Taurean Prince. We got 0, so I mean, that could be 5%. But we did not come up with much Prince. He's at 44, both forward spots, but we've got an abundance of guys in that price range that are just way outpacing him. Maybe it's just a rotating a guy in. He is projected for 28.5 minutes. Should maybe consider those. No, I'll deal with it when I update. I don't think there's much upside there. 0.68 per minute so far this season on 9.4% usage. Filipowski, only if the role changes. He's at 14 minutes and irrelevant right now. If you see his minutes jump because Lowry doesn't play, then maybe. He would just become yet another value guy on this one. Nobody else really relevant down here. 9% at Keldon. I know people were asking about Keldon last show. Went out, played 19-4, and put up 22.3 FanDuel points. That is ahead of his typical rate. It was 1+ per minute, but not a lot of minutes in that one. If he's going to give you that kind of output and ends up playing the 26 minutes that I've got him projected for, then as a mid-board play, he's fine. 5,400, he could even have a little bit of ceiling there. But you would need both the minutes and the output at the same time for him to have any kind of value. And he's not really reliable for doing that. Jump over to have a quick conversation about some centers, and then we will punch out of here. Again, so Giannis just kind of hanging over everything right now. But Wemby, a spectacular second option. Looks like we're getting a ton of both of them on the DraftKings slate, which is pretty nice. The spoils of having a ton of value on a 3-game slate is that you just get the 2 top projected players, even though they're crazy expensive. So tons of the pairing on DraftKings. A decent amount of it, honestly, on FanDuel as well. But we got way, way more Wemby at 10.5 on DraftKings than we got at 11.4 on FanDuel, even with that power forward eligibility. Again, Kessler we got none of. Just a 4.43 value proposition at 7,200 on the FanDuel slate. That's a way different price than the 61 that we get him at on DraftKings. 26% exposure in the top 150 on DraftKings. He's our 3rd highest owned center. Level with the field, taking maybe a few points ahead. Taking a little bit of a bigger position on that, maybe sacrificing a couple shares of Wemby, a couple shares if you're moving off of some of the Giannis. I think getting a little bit more Kessler over there makes some sense. 119 per minute so far this year on the DraftKings scoring system, 127 on FanDuel, one of the most differentiated players site to site. But still at 61, a productive piece, but that's also what creates that salary difference. Now, as we talked about, Brolo we just kind of referred to. 0.91 per minute on 16.9 so far this year. Just if Giannis doesn't go, more to do. If Giannis does go, just looks like how he is right here. 26.6. Looks like it's an is who he is kind of a game for Brolo unless the situation changes. But he's priced for that. 5,900. Not a bad price on FanDuel. You're getting 5+. At 57 on DraftKings, you're just under a 5 value score. But again, there's not a lot of 5.5s on this slate, so we'll take what we get. 20% as far as our top 150. That is a hard undercut to the field. But that's 1 in 5 out of our top 150 do have him. So, bear in mind what those percentages really, do and don't mean. Ayton, again, FanDuel, that's a lot of DeAndre Ayton. 6,900. He's a 103 per minute player this year on 19% usage. Last year, not much better on 21.1% usage, but was better, 1.11. Just 53% true shooting for the big man so far. 6.7 assists, 16.7% rebounding rate. Everything there could be a little bit better. Most specifically the true shooting and the rebounding. Put up 36.6 in 31.9 the other day. That's approaching this kind of, it's halfway in between maybe. He's coming up like a big, big piece on the FanDuel slate at 57% of the top 150 because we can put both of these guys at the power forward spot. That's what's boxing out your Walker Kessler shares. So are some of those Naz Reid and Brolo shares. But this is the biggest looking piece right now. Between these two, for 1,000 price difference, there's a projection difference. And again, sorry to dive in more, FanDuel right now on this, but like they're just very different plays across sites. It's interesting there because there's 5 points of separation if you're just looking at the projections, but if you note the $1,000 price difference, you actually get a 100th of a point, but a slightly better value score, point per dollar score on Lopez than you do Ayton right now without a situational change. So the fact that we got 26% of Lopez for the cheaper price, 57% of Ayton, might just be a product of construction as far as the tools looking to spend X amount of salary. Because it's not necessarily, I mean, it is a higher projection, so he would land that way a little bit more. And maybe there's just no real good way to spend the extra 1,000 in the most common constructions there, which is what I think leads to that pretty significant ownership gap. The fact that Brolo came up at 26% and level with the field, I think does maybe create another spot into which you could directly pivot some of these shares, take a little bit more of that and gain a little advantage against the field on that while still maintaining an advantage against the field on this. And then you've got $1,000 to spend in each of those lineups that you did that, where maybe you can access more of these two. Maybe you can access some Anthony Edwards or some Lillard or somebody that looks good that you don't have. So it's another interesting pivot point. On DraftKings 56-57, they don't have that price difference. 24% below the field, 20.6% below the field. Am I looking at the right? I'm not looking at, I was looking at, sorry, that was Nas and Brolo don't have that. They do have a price difference, 57.72, but we're already getting more Brook Lopez. 16.6% of DeAndre Ayton at 72. That's a much different price. So it's just less interesting right here. Rudy Gobert is who he is. 0.88 per minute so far this year. 112 last year. There's room certainly for Gobert to go back to his previous form. Just 12% of them on the DraftKings slate under the field. 6% of them harder undercut on FanDuel. Randall we talked about, but again, pretty massive undercut to the field on FanDuel while maintaining a big share at 31%. Collins we've talked about. Portis we've talked about. Jalen Smith we didn't really get. 5% over here at 3,600. None of them at 4,300. Just projected at 14 minutes. Vooch, 3% on the FanDuel slate. Just under that on DraftKings. As far as players who are, realistic, I don't think anybody would call Vooch a star, but realistic, BB plus type NBA players on a short slate, a few extra shares in your pocket of Vooch when he's definitely owned in the single digits by the field. Not a terrible idea. It's just a horrible matchup as far as his upside scoring goes, but he's been providing upside this year. 1.30 on 21.4% usage on FanDuel, 132 on DraftKings. That's up from 112 FanDuel last year. So again, a good, realistic NBA player, just not a good situation and not necessarily mathing out right. But it is another reasonable spot where you could take at a different price anyway. You could take some of these and move them to Vooch and pick up just a little advantage on a good player against the field. If the field's going to be in the 6-8% range and you want to get to 10-12 somewhere around there, just have a few extra. Same thing over here. No reason, outside of just, trying to game it that you have to do that. It's not even necessarily advisable. I'm just saying there is a position there that you could potentially occupy. Just onesie, twosie shares on everybody down here. We got 2% of Sandro just because it's a short slate. He's projected at 15 minutes with no real upside. But again, short slate, you build out a ton of lineups. These guys do land on some of them. But we talked through the upside, guys. Let's see what's going on in the chat. Doug Gilly is saying, Terry, Buzelis played 22 minutes and scored 30 fantasy points for the Bulls. I'm taking a stand on him. Did see a pretty significant jump in minutes in that one. I got him back at 12 today. He didn't really come out at that level. At the dead min, though, I mean, if we could be confident about the 22 minutes, then yeah, he'd be a play. I don't know that I'd be confident about the 31-8 repeating. He's played 8 minutes a night over 7 games. 0.87 per minute on 17% usage in that tiny sample. That's come on just 39.5% true shooting so far. Again, this is not much to work with as far as data points. The most concerning thing would be the minutes. Yeah, I don't know that I'm necessarily seeing it. Let's see what the rotation looked like. Popcorn. I tell you what, he was one of the first 2 guys off the bench in the first. Didn't play the entire second quarter. He played a 6-minute stint at the end of the first, but again, was one of the first guys off the bench. Didn't play the second quarter, didn't start the third quarter, but played another 6:40 at the end of the third, and then played most of the fourth, but they kind of emptied the bench for the fourth. So I think that's where you lose me on the minutes. Not that this is necessarily going to be a more competitive game. That was a 119-99 loss. I see no reason to think that this is going to be any more competitive. So maybe. But if you do that, know that you're just kind of throwing a dart at more like speculative minutes. But it is at least encouraging that it was like one of the first two. It was him and Dalen Terry who were the first 2 guys off the bench. But Dalen Terry played in the second quarter. He played 2 stints. He played in the third quarter, mostly complete stint, and then played a chunk in the fourth quarter. THT really didn't play until the fourth quarter. If I was going to pull minutes the way I have it set up, maybe that's what I would do. Where the hell's the file? When I click away, I get lost. I could give him maybe like 4 of those minutes. Make that like 14-16 the other way. But I don't know that I necessarily want to project it that way because, again, we're just kind of speculating on those minutes. Even the 12 is already above what he's been getting. But it is nice that he was the first, one of the first couple guys off the bench. I'll give him that much. But you're throwing a dart if you play it. Tough matchup with blowout potential in a stellar play last game. It's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, you're hitting on it exactly. That would be what makes it interesting is the fact that he, did just get those minutes. It's less to me that he was good in that game than it is that the minutes were given to him. That's before they knew how he was going to play. But to your point, I think you're saying like the coaching would say like, well, he played well. Let's give him another shot, which totally makes sense. It's just not like predictive for what the math is. But yeah, like ideal wise, you're not going down. You're not chasing a total pipe dream. You've got something tangible to hang on to. Power saying Mama DiVincenzo on stacks with Chicago cheapies for blowout lineups, but Kamara in lineups with Milwaukee that have Giannis out. That was answering Mamba about top play at shooting guard. Stephen Cunningham saying, what do you think about Wemby minutes? I got him at 32. He's playing under 31 a night overall on average. But if you're worried about like 24/7 the other day, I don't think that's a concern. Let's see. He played just 3 minutes of the fourth quarter last time out. Was in and out of the game a few different times. Let's see. What was the... No foul trouble. It's not something I would worry about. I sincerely don't think that they're going to play him this way. Again, he only played 24/7 the other day, but they mostly emptied the bench in the fourth. He and all of the other starters barely played in the fourth quarter. What I'm more interested in is the broken up stints in the second. I don't remember specifically what happened in that one, but he took a bigger break in the second than I would normally expect. Usually it's 2 stints, but it was a longer break. But I wouldn't sweat it. I think you're looking at 29 to 32, and I've got him on the high side, I guess. But I don't think it's, even if I took him down by a minute, he would remain the second most highly projected player and would get into just as many lineups. Power, my intent was to do one when I started this show, but now it's almost 6 o'clock. We went a little longer than I was expecting to for a 3-game slate. I will see if I can get my act together quick enough to do it. But stay tuned in the Discord. Hit the subscribe button down there so you get a notification. And I tell you what, let me punch out because I got to get this stuff updated and then see if I can throw that together. So you'll know in the next half hour or so, as I know, whether or not there'll be an NFL show today. Grant came up all right, Mamba. I'm not the biggest fan in the world overall, but he's right there as far as our exposures on DraftKings. He's a much better piece than he is on FanDuel. 18%. Again, it's a reasonable chunk. It's just the 67 power forward only. It's just kind of an awkward fit for a guy who's a sub 1 fantasy point per minute guy. I think there are better buys on the slate, but given that, the field's probably 25-ish against that, or your numbers may vary depending on where you're getting ownership, and this has been updated probably 3 times since this sim ran. But if you wanted to take him up to around the field, you're probably okay on a short slate, but not my favorite play. I think there's better ways to spend that. With that, I am going to punch out, guys. Money Crockett, the usage that I'm citing there is just a stat pull from the stat boards down here. It's whatever's the NBA stat board has. That's just referring to what's going on. That's not a speculative number. The model does all sorts of speculative stuff about the game environment when it builds the fantasy point projection. That's an entirely different. This is just a dashboard. So this is just doing data pulls for existing stats. So you guys rock out there. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it. Without you guys, as I always say, I'd just be sitting here talking to myself. So I really appreciate everybody hanging out. I appreciate anybody who hit the like button for me. I appreciate it also if you subscribe. We're trying to get to 1,000 by the new year. Check out rotoscouts.com. Access to NHL, NBA, NFL right now, MLB when it comes back. Under $1 a day, any plan you choose. Weekly, monthly, quarterly plans available. Click around. Ask me any questions in the Discord. Check out acemind.io as well. Those are our sim partners. Those guys rock. Promo code RotoScouts over there, all in caps, gets you 20% off your first month. With that, guys, good luck out there tonight. Somebody go win something. Show it to me when you do. And I will see you either in a little bit or tomorrow. Find out soon. See you guys.